We're covering a Fortune article on the potential of a doom loop for New York City, but also what it says about how commercial real estate risk is concentrated in just a few cities and a few urban cores at the moment, including cities like New York and San Francisco. Columbia Business School professor Stijn van Nuremberg has a doozy of a nickname. Um, he's been called the prophet of urban doom. Now he's telling Fortune he sees an event horizon of a 1970s style downward spiral known as a doom loop for New York City. As the article goes, everyone knows office buildings across the country have taken a beating from COVID and the rise of remote work. Perhaps only San Francisco is a better example than New York City, where the amount of offices collecting dust is at a record high. Almost 20% are sitting empty. Some economists are saying the effects could reach far beyond just the real estate sector. Without drastic changes, New York City could be headed for a self-perpetuating doom loop that will affect everything from housing values to public service budgets to the crime rates. The most famous example is the 1970s, when white flight and a fiscal crisis sent New York City into a slump that it didn't kick for over a decade. It's a simple equation, quote, government's cutting spending means less money for transportation, less money for education, for sanitation, for all the things that make cities attractive. Remote work has upended the traditional market for urban office spaces. Studies show that about 30% of paid days are worked from home. And on top of that, the federal money that poured into the sector to prop it up during COVID is starting to run out, which could usher in a string of defaults. And that's what has city budget watchers so worried. Falling commercial property values are already lowering building owners' tax payments, but struggling commercial owners not being able to pay off their debts or potentially their taxes could send shockwaves far beyond the real estate sector. New York City generates a little below 10% of its tax revenue from commercial properties, and any meaningful decline to that revenue source would hurt budget expenditures across the board. The banking sector, which has high exposure to commercial property, is also under pressure from beleaguered property values. The biggest banks are mostly safe, but much of New York's commercial property debt is held by smaller regional banks and local banks. Nuremberg said that banks own about half of the $6 trillion in commercial real estate debt in the United States, but of that half, 70% is owned by small regional banks. So this is pointing to something else we pointed out in other articles and other coverage, that the threat to the major banks, the major banking system, is overstated, that there probably is an issue for some regional banks, but it's probably selective to those regional banks that have portfolios very concentrated on some of the markets like San Francisco or New York office properties that are really struggling right now. Because despite what this article is insinuating, this really isn't a problem for the broad commercial real estate space. And we're even seeing some office markets actually doing pretty well that aren't in New York, San Francisco, Portland, LA, and so forth. Quote, some of the local banks, community banks that are overexposed, those ones are going to get killed. Um, the crux of the doom loop theory is that it's self-perpetuating. If vacancies rise and property values fall, cities can't collect as much tax revenue, and overexposed banks have to cut back on lending. That means less public spending on things like transit, sanitation, and public safety, and less investment in small business. A dirtier, more dangerous, and less accessible downtown is less likely to attract companies and remote workers, meaning vacancies will rise even more and the property values will fall further. The money is now running out, or it has run out. This is the first year when we don't see extra federal dollars anymore. That's beginning to bite. The vacancy rate is already an all-time high. San Van Nuremberg, that combination packs a pretty severe punch. Um, Again, though, I would point out that this article is really focused on New York. It mentioned San Francisco, but we are seeing markets like Miami. We're seeing markets in the Southwest, Southeast. Um, there's a lot of variance in here. Industrial, other commercial real estate categories are doing pretty well. But we do see these kind of articles that do focus on some of the urban cores that are having challenges. And that's definitely accurate. But it can get overblown when those articles imply that these issues are impacting all of commercial real estate. Because as we can see from the data points provided, this article is really focused in this case in New York, and many of these articles are focused on a few urban cores where offices are having challenges.